This conference will now be recorded.
Great. So let's get started. My name is Tom Hopcroft, and I want to welcome you all to our to Mass TLC's Ask Me Anything forum today with Commonwealth Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Mike Kennealy. This session is part of a ongoing convening of tech CEOs and other leaders that we've been bringing together on a regular basis throughout the whole COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to really try to come together as a community and work the situation together. Today we have the opportunity to invite some experts who are really on the front lines on the business side of our government and helping us work through this. So we're honored to have with us on the call today Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Mike Kennealy, the Undersecretary for Business Growth, Mark Fuller, and joining us in a bit will be the Secretary's Chief of Staff, Gina McLaughlin. So we're thrilled to have them with us today. As we get started, I want to thank our global sponsors for their support. They provide not only financial support for the organization, but really thought leadership. These are some of the real movers and shakers that are, keeping the tech industry moving the way that it is. As a housekeeping measure, we find that it's best if people can turn on your cameras. It helps. There's a lot of nonverbal communication. We can see your smiles and your waves and things. It also helps contribute to that sense of community. But turn off your mic because we all have our family and other things floating around in the background, and it'll help the clarity of the call, except when talking. We encourage you to use the chat feature on the side. That you can see there's a little bubble up in the corner you can click on, and I'll explain a little bit about the format, but if you have additional questions, you can put them in there. We are recording this session, so a lot of our executive sessions are off the record. This one we're going to record for people who aren't able to be with us right here so that we can put it up online for them later. As we get started, as many of you know, we have a survey out to the executives within our community to understand the impact, and we're tracking this over time. And so I wanted to share just a few of the high-level findings that we're seeing as the results are coming in on that survey. We will make this in a more granular sense available once we've closed the survey and are able to compile that. So a few of the key findings, a majority of tech companies are seeing a negative impact, which is probably not a surprise on their business. For some, it's very severe. A few are doing actually very well, including some of the companies that provide tools like the one that we're using today. Most of the companies have frozen hiring, but again, a few of them are doing well and are still hiring. A majority are thinking that in-person work and events may resume around the beginning of Q3. Again, some sooner, some later. The general consensus is that this will be more of a U-shaped impact rather than a V-shape, with measurable economic improvements not happening until the beginning of 2021. So those are some of the highlights that we're seeing in the early responses from the survey. And I just thought it would be good to share that as we get started to give you the most up-to-date information. For the call today, the way I'd like to start off is I'm going to invite the Secretary to make some initial remarks. We've collected and organized questions from you as you registered for the event today. And so what we've done is we've put them in what we think is sort of a logical order. And so what I'll do is I'll call on executives to ask their questions, or if you're not here, I can ask the question for you, but it'll give you an opportunity to say who you are and ask your question. The Secretary can address it. As I referenced before with the chat feature, if questions come up during the call and something occurs to you, please put it in the chat. I have a few members of my team with us here. Sarah Frame, Ruth Morris, and Mackenzie Lebert are with us. And they're going to help me keep track of all the incoming questions, and we'll either Slack them over to me or they may jump in and help ask those questions. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Kennealy to kick off the conversation and give some opening remarks.
Great. Well, Tom, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you and your colleagues today. I thought what I might do to open things up is describe a little bit about the efforts the administration overall is taking to combat the virus and its impacts on the Commonwealth, and also touch specifically on areas in my world in housing and economic development. Pleased to be joined by Undersecretary Fuller, and I expect to be joined at some point in the call by my Chief of Staff, Gina McLaughlin. Suffice to say, this is an effort the entire administration is engaged with. I think it was about a month ago, the governor announced the formation of a COVID command center, which is run by Secretary Mary Lou Sutters from Health and Human Services. And it's meant to be a focal point for really all of our efforts to combat the pandemic. There's a representative from each secretariat who serves in the command center, and it's proven to be a great way to leverage the entirety of state government and to tackle issues that cross secretariat. So that's been a very robust effort in the command center. Shortly after that announcement, it was announced we have a COVID advisory group, which informs the command center's actions, and it's made up of medical experts in infectious disease and other areas. So there's a very strong administration-wide effort, and it's as you can imagine, 24/7, all hands on deck for all of us involved in the Baker administration. In addition to that, as you've seen, probably the governor making daily briefings on the numbers, rapid increase in the amount of testing. He has said that he believes we're shortly about to enter a period where the numbers are going to reach the highest numbers, and hopefully through the social distancing protocols that we've enacted and encouraged, at some point we'll see those numbers level off. But we're likely to enter, as he said, a very difficult period of time where the numbers are going to increase. Clearly, the business community has been most impacted by a number of the executive orders meant to encourage social distancing. Clearly, the notion that businesses deemed non-essential have to close physical locations has proven to be a major difficulty for a lot of our companies, particularly the ones that are most reliant on physical locations, as well as a stay-at-home advisory. So we've been in a period of time where it's just paramount that we have this level of social distancing to stop the spread of the virus, and to really, across the whole administration, do what we can to mitigate both the spread and the economic and other impacts that we're seeing. I will say, from our standpoint, from Mark and myself and others, having this kind of communication with the business community is really critical. I've convened now a weekly conference call with all the chambers of commerce across the state, with business groups like Mass TLC. I know Tom has been on our calls. We found those to be incredibly important. Those are calls with 100, 150 people every Friday. We've convened a couple of interim calls as well. But I think it's important for the business community to hear from us the things we're doing, as well as to hear your feedback. And I've done a number of calls like this with a number of groups, and I find these to be really, really valuable. And look, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together by comparing notes about what's happening on the ground and how we can help each other out. In terms of specific areas of support we've tried to provide for businesses, I'd say it falls into a couple of areas. One is financing. And so, as I mentioned, it's a very challenging time in particular for our small companies. And so very early on in the process, we stood up a small business loan fund through our Mass Growth Capital Corporation, which is a $10 million fund, later supplemented by another $10 million. So $20 million in loan capital for small businesses. That given the demand out there, as you might imagine, that fund was pretty quickly oversubscribed. And now we have been pointing our companies to programs run by the Small Business Administration. At first, their economic injury disaster loan product, which came out a couple of weeks ago. They now have a product where companies can get sort of an advance on an economic injury loan. And then, of course, with the passage of the CARES Act and all the resources that brings, most notably for our companies, the Paycheck Protection Program, which was launched about a week ago. But we're on the phone with the SBA daily, if not multiple times per day, and coordinating with our division of banks and other resources to help those programs get stood up here in the Commonwealth, help our companies access them, and help where we can support our banks in the implementation of those programs. The governor also, some weeks ago, signed legislation to allow the collection of sales and meals and hospitality taxes to be deferred for 90 days. That was a help to our small companies in those areas. And in addition, announced that individual income taxes will not be due till July 15th. So we've been active trying to help out the cash flows of our companies, both through state programs and helping them access the federal programs, which are now coming online. I'd highlight a few other areas we've been involved with. One is the governor signed some reforms to unemployment insurance, waiving the traditional 1-week waiting period for folks to collect that. We've been in very close collaboration with our colleagues in labor and workforce development as they have worked with companies through their rapid response and their work share programs, helping to mitigate layoffs at some of our larger companies. That's been an important effort. Within my secretary sits the Division of Banks and the Division of Insurance. And through each of those, there's been guidance issued to the banks and insurance companies, encouraging them to be flexible and lenient with their customers that may be experiencing cash flow problems today. And I will say the response from both those communities has been terrific. And the banks are now much more active partners with us as these federal programs like the Paycheck Protection Program effectively flow through our banks and our credit unions here in the Commonwealth. And that the banks have been incredibly supportive and had a good dialogue with us. There's a whole other set of challenges on the other side of my world in housing, as you might imagine. It's a period of time where trying to make sure we have housing stability for the folks who need it most is really important. We have encouraged effectively all operators of low-income housing, public housing authorities, other affordable housing to suspend evictions during this period of time. There was similar guidance from the Division of Banks around suspending foreclosures. We have put in $5 million more into a program called RAFT, which is rental assistance for families in transition to help families that are rent challenged. So we've had a number of programs to help support housing stability during what's clearly a challenging time for a lot of folks who rent and own homes in the Commonwealth. And we have a whole other set of challenges around the homelessness that we're tackling as well. But suffice to say, across housing and economic development, clearly a very busy time. A couple other things I'll touch on. We did, the governor signed an executive order. This is applicable to our public companies here in Massachusetts, allowing them to conduct their annual shareholder meetings remotely. And we thought that was an important thing to put in place where we're encouraging, discouraging large gatherings and meetings of any kind, and thought that'd be helpful for our companies to stage their meetings remotely. And then finally, I'll point to an effort that is something we're particularly proud of around manufacturing. So I co-chair our Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative. It's an effort we've had for some years now to grow the advanced manufacturing sector in Massachusetts. And there's a great need for personal protective equipment for our healthcare providers and first responders. And as you might have read, there's been some shortage in those areas. And as part of our efforts to boost the inventory of such products, we've encouraged our manufacturers to come forward and say, if you have the ability to repurpose some of your production lines, come talk to us and we'll help you do that. And hopefully we can produce more of this PPE. And I'm proud to say that now 282 manufacturers in Massachusetts have put their hands up to say we want to produce more of this needed product, and they're working actively with us. The collaborative has been a great resource. We have a number of academic partners, MIT, UMass Lowell, Lincoln Labs, and others that can opine on product design and meeting FDA requirements and other areas. But it's been a very increasingly organized program to help our manufacturers. And I think the governor described this as inspiring. I think it is, to see this many people come forward to help. Hopefully that gives you a sense for the level of focus across the administration, really truly leveraging all the resources we have, as well as some specific targeted initiatives for the business community and a little bit on housing. I will say in this period of time now where the governor has said we expect the numbers to hit a peak at some point this month, we are very much focused on two areas. One is mitigating the spread of the virus, and the second is, in my world, trying to manage the economic impacts of the virus. At some point, I look forward to a much more robust, strategic, forward-looking discussion about what the economy looks like on the other end of this. And I expect you may have some questions on that today, but I will say at this moment in time, we're really focused on those two areas, the public health emergency and the economic externalities. But happy to take any and all questions. And I will say, I find these forums to be really helpful, not only for us to answer your questions, but also to hear what's going on with your companies and in your communities. Has been really invaluable for us. So appreciate the chance to be here today.
Great. Well, thank you, Secretary Kennealy. Thank you, and thank the Baker administration for your leadership through this crisis, and also for your open communication. I mean, I know we as an organization have been on those calls at least once a week, sometimes a couple times a week, and we're flowing the information down as quickly as we can through our COVID resource page on our website to keep our community as informed as possible. I know you and the other folks in the administration are super busy, and so really appreciate taking the time out also to sit down directly and not just go through intermediaries, but to hear and speak directly with our members. As I mentioned at the outset, I've tried to organize some of the questions that came in. At least we'll get started going through in sort of a logical order, and then we will, to the extent people have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. I see Yogesh Gupta is here. Yogesh, do you want to introduce yourself? And you asked a question about programs and efforts to help mid-sized companies. You'd like to kick us off?
Thanks, Tom, and thank you, Secretary Kennealy, for joining. So I run a company called Progress Software. We are publicly traded. We are headquartered in the Boston suburbs in Bedford. We have approximately 500 employees in Massachusetts, which is about a third of our global employment base. The question that I had is really, we're fortunate that we can do the vast majority of our work from home. So we've actually been able to do that and not miss a beat on that aspect. Obviously, we don't control the demand environment, but from a overall sort of operational perspective, knock on wood, we have a business that is amenable to work from home, and we've had a fairly robust effort over the last several years to build an infrastructure that allows us to do that. So business continuity. So we're fortunate that way. That said, we're also a profitable business, and so we're not in short-term cash crunch. So that's another interesting thing. That said, I kind of wonder with all these programs being put in place, is there anything for a company like ours, right, that could be useful? And the reason why I say that is that we run our business well, we run our business lean, we are trying to do the right thing as a business, but with all the help that gets provided to a lot of other folks, are we encouraging people to not run their business well, and not by not helping those that actually run it well, right? So is there something that could be done for our employees who, for example, right, people who can't come into work but do things like office cleanings, right? I want to talk. There are people who are literally, we are paying them today, but they're not doing any work, and our goal is we will continue to pay them, because I don't want to change the economic situation for them, right, at all.
Yeah.
So any ideas, any thoughts?
Well, in terms of support for companies, it sounds like you're in. There's so much distress right now among our very small companies, and particularly if you think about restaurants, retail, hospitality, tourism. I mean, there's real distress out there, and so I think it would be natural that the programs that are coming out now are geared most directly for companies like that, and maybe as a secondary matter, as we assess the impact more broadly across the economy, we'll see needs to fill in some gaps. I know one thing I'm going to be very curious about over these next few weeks, as the PPP and other programs in the CARES Act roll out, where are we seeing the gaps? What are those addressing? What aren't they addressing? But as you can imagine, there's real distress on Main Street today in terms of small companies and companies reliant on their physical locations in ways that maybe a technology company isn't. I think in a lot of ways, one of the best things we can do for you is make sure we have a healthy economy on the other end of this and support your employees. And that's where so much of these, the unemployment insurance reforms, and that's also, that's part state and that's part federal, helping to support employees in that way is really important. So I think it's natural that the first wave of programs now are geared towards companies that are really very directly impacted. And we'll have to assess the kind of secondary and tertiary impacts as we go.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. I think the unemployment benefits and so on, in some ways then potentially help even profitable employers who let their employees go prematurely, yes, rather than those that keep them. And I think that is not really necessarily the right way to do things, but that's just my one person's view in the world. But just take that, with whatever grain of salt you'd like.
It's an interesting point. We'll have to assess with any public policy of any scale. There's going to be unintended consequences, and I think it's incumbent on us to take a look at that. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
great. So next, Brittany, are you there? Yes, good.
Yeah.
I wanted to, Brittany Greenfield had a question about support for startups trying to weather the storm vis-a-vis the CARES Act. Brittany, do you want to?
Yep, and just to echo everybody else's, thank you guys for all the great work that you've been doing.
Introduce yourself too.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that. That's helpful. I'm Brittany Greenfield, CEO and founder of Wabi, an early stage cybersecurity software company. And so we're lean. Just to put things in perspective and frame up my question, last year we were primarily contractors, and we're just starting to bring on full-time employees and convert from 1099 to W-2. So you probably can get a sense of where I'm starting to go with this. A lot of the CARES Act seems to have been written without recognition of the innovation economy. And I know especially in Massachusetts, it's an important revenue generator for us. And while as startups, we may not be the largest employers, we are the future employers as well. And especially once you guys had to turn over from the Massachusetts fund to the SBA, it felt like we had a lot of the rug pulled out from underneath us in terms of being able to access some of these emergency loans, and they're not coming through. How are you guys continuing to work with startups, knowing that we're a bit different than the broader applicability and standards that have been set with the SBA guidelines? And quite frankly, by the time a lot of the guidelines got out yesterday, most of the money's gone for us to be able to apply for it. So we're in a weird place. But what are you doing as a state to make sure we're continuing to support our startup economy?
Well, I'll tackle that, but in terms of the federal programs, there's still plenty of money there. It came online a week ago, but there's still plenty of money to go after if that program works for you. And I understand that the PPP in particular is not going to work for every company. If there are startups with cash flow needs, there are other programs we've had across the state now that are still applicable, and Mass Growth Capital and their more traditional loan products is one. We also have our Mass Ventures, which is the state's venture capital arm, and there's other programs through Mass Development and other of our agencies. But so those programs are still there. What we don't have are new programs for startups. As you point out, a lot of the new programs were geared towards smaller companies that are frankly probably in more traditional industries, because those are the ones hardest hit right now. And so, we should talk about that and talk about how we can leverage the existing programs we have, maybe in new ways, if startups are getting hit in particular.
Yeah, I think we are, and I don't think it gets reported on as much, but I can't tell you, we fortunately didn't have to withdraw any offers. We were about to make a bunch of offers, right? And so now we postponed, we've totally changed everything. We're not making any new hires. We would actually, because we're in an advantageous position where we think when we come out of this, we'll need to scale again quickly. But it would be great if we could tap into that. We're not asking for free cash here. We're willing to do stuff, but it's just very hard to access it, especially when a lot of the requirements aren't built for how we look at payroll, or, the requirements seem to be shifting. I'm sure you saw the EDOL loan change today from the 10,000 to the 1 per person and whatnot. And it's just a little bit tough. So anything you guys can do to help support startups, you're going to see a lot go under. I hear about RIFs every day from my peers.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Christina, I saw you're weighing in on the chat on the same topic. Did you have anything you wanted to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. So also there's businesses a lot in the tech service sector where it's a network of people who are on the same level, who pool projects and pool together like a consulting project, and one person secures the consulting project and then they leverage several other consultants. And so for us, the PPP, it's very difficult to even understand whether we're eligible, because yes, we pay people as subcontractors, but we don't know, average payroll. I guess we can average it out by the year, but that's not exactly how our business model works. So it's difficult to understand the PPP. So I just wanted to kind of echo what Brittany was saying, is that there's a lot of business models in the tech sector where, we're not a coffee shop. And so it's difficult to even quantify our overhead. Our overhead's not rent. Our overhead is a lot of virtual services, and I don't even know if PPP applies to the virtual overhead that we do have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I think that's a great example of trying to understand where the gaps are. And it's a week-old program, obviously stood up very, very quickly. And we should keep talking about that as this rolls out. And I'm hearing this from companies across a variety of industries that say this really works well for me, or frankly, it doesn't work that well. And so as we assess where the gaps are, I think that's going to be an important part of the discussion.
Great. Bruce Hecht, do you want to, you put up a question about strategies to forecast around emerging needs and economic conditions?
Hi, yes, thanks, Tom, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, this I think it's an interesting time to pull together, leaders from different sectors and to follow up on the questions that you're asking. And at this time, what might be some observations about potential? And I wanted to add to that one thing that came into my inbox is from the UN World Tourism Organization about a challenge that 1 in 10 people around the world are participating in the economy, related to travel and tourism. And, here, of course, we're also fortunate, to be such a destination. So what kinds of things could we do? Obviously, the short term, like we're talking about, and what new opportunities might be emerging that we could mobilize, participants from these communities?
Let me just add, Secretary, before you jump in on that one, that we're not only a destination for tourism, but we also have a very robust and active travel tech cluster, with the kayaks and the TripAdvisors and other such companies headquartered here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And what's interesting, long before this crisis emerged, we were undergoing a whole strategic rethink of our tourism strategy, which had not taken place for a long time. And Mark and I oversee our Office of Travel and Tourism. It's a really important area for the Commonwealth, and it's one where I think for a long time we had to rethink what we're doing there. It's an important sector, and now it's obviously undergoing tremendous challenges. I don't know when we'll get back to normal levels of travel. If you look at the travel stats coming out of Logan and other of our transportation hubs, the fall off is dramatic. I think when travel does resume, we got to be there ready to promote the state as a destination. We had the governor filed an economic development bill about a month ago. Feels like a very long time ago. And as part of that bill, there's a lot in there, but part of it was more support for travel and tourism, in particular, $10 million of capital to invest in local tourism assets. So to an asset-based strategy to match the marketing-based strategy we've had for a long time. Very long way of saying we were in the middle of really trying to assess what the state's tourism strategy ought to be, and then we obviously have been sidelined with what's happening now. But I would hope when things get back to something resembling normalcy and people are traveling again, we're going to continue to be an incredibly important tourist destination, and we'll have the right strategy to make that happen. We are trying to work very collaboratively with our regional tourism councils. So one issue is a bit in the weeds, but to give you a sense for the engagement we have with that community today. In the grant money we give for marketing or to the tourism councils, the stipulations on how much they can spend on their operations versus marketing, we sort of waived that. We said, geez, we got to make sure you guys have the support you need to operate. And there's other things like that we're working on to make sure we can support our regional tourism councils. But it's something we're mindful of, something we've been focused on for a long time. But I think it will be a little while before something resembling normal travel levels come back.
Great. John Cadiz, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question around the housing stock with the student population? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, John.
I can see
you. We can see you. I can. So John was.
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
There's a number of students across the communities here who are now in trouble because their internships, their jobs are here, their homes are in other parts. Their programs at the grad level are getting all messed up. Is the state taking any programs to actively work to get people into new housing arrangements or new facilities to keep them employed with the tech companies across the state and get them on their programs?
So these are students that need housing for the summer for jobs, or what? How do you see that, John? or is it more housing on a permanent basis? I can't hear me again.
You're on mute, John.
There we go. I was having some technical problems. I'm more used to Zoom than this interface, so sorry about that.
Right.
What was the question?
The student housing problem, is that kind of a seasonal summer issue in your view, or is it more longer term?
Well, you tell me how long this social distancing restrictions are going to be and how long the schools will be closed down.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know, right now we're all planning week to week, and this is the sort of thing that really requires quarter to quarter. You know, there's some people talking about being able to open the schools up next fall and get full classes going again.
Yeah.
There's other people are warning us that if you do that, you're going to have major resurgence in the infection rates. And I think we need to be planning for both sort of situations. And I don't think we've seen programs to address that. And a lot of these people are not used to scrambling like they've got to right now in a very tight housing market.
Yeah, it's a fair point, John. And before this crisis hit, we were talking very openly about a housing crisis in Massachusetts. And we've been, I mentioned the economic development bill the governor filed, but one of the 4 main areas of focus in the bill was literally called addressing the housing crisis. So we've been in a very tough housing position now for a long time in the Commonwealth, mostly driven by a lack of supply and a lack of production. And so, for example, if you look at the last 30 years of housing production in Massachusetts, it is less than half what it was in the prior 30-year period. So we've had an enormous challenge around the availability of housing, affordable housing, workforce housing, housing of all kinds. And so we need to assess, you know, how this is going to impact housing on a short, medium, and long-term basis. I hope what you said, well, look, I mean, no one knows exactly what's going to happen here, right? But you mentioned the possibility of this coming back in the fall. I think it's really important that we do whatever we can do right now in this period of time to stop or slow the spread of it. And I think in so many respects, somebody made this point earlier to me this week that one of the worst things for the economy would be is if we decide we're open again and then we have a resurgence of the virus. With the impact that's going to have on consumer confidence, I think it'd be really, really not very good. So we're watching all those things, but I'm particularly mindful as the housing and development secretary that we had real housing challenges before this hit, and we got.
I know we have the real housing challenges. The challenge is the community of people in the education, graduate school, colleges are not necessarily top of the line in people's thinking about where the housing problem is. And right now, schools basically have kicked as many of their students off campus as they can.
Yeah. All right, we'll take a close look at that.
So they're in deep sneakers in some cases.
Yeah, we'll take a close look at that population in particular. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Hey, Mads, I see you have a few different questions out there. Do you want to introduce yourself and ask a couple of them?
Sure, I'm Mads Little, and I'm the CEO of Benno Networks. We're based in Burlington, Mass. And I put out a couple of questions out there. One was more from a macro political level. And so maybe you probably can't answer that now, but bring that back into the Baker administration is, my concern is that we operate across multiple states and on a global level. And my concern is that some states have clamped down in terms of work from home, and there's been a disparity. And as soon as this opens back up, you know, if you have states where we're traveling then across borders, which we do here in the state, in the US, then we're just going to get back into the whole thing all over again. So that's a political macro issue that somebody had to deal with. On the more sort of direct thing in terms of what we're doing is the PP loans that have come out. We are one of the applying in there, but it's been extremely fluid. And from when it first opened up, I think last Friday, there was document changes, and depending on which bank you were using, we were looking at Silicon Valley Bank, PacWest, and others. I think Bank of America was the first one that really got its act together and did a lot of stuff on Friday. But as that moved through, there's a bunch of attestation docs that we have to do, and I have to sign as the CEO. And I could be signing an attestation doc one day that we qualify for this, but then the next day the form is different. And should we already have filed, I could now be in violation of this. So for me as a leader and signing this, these documents, that has been a big problem. They changed at least 3 times over the weekend. There was another one that came out on Monday. So that is a problem. So I'm now putting myself into potential legal jeopardy by having to do so. So we are now taking the position that should we be approved, but prior to receiving any money, let's just say you're approved in a month, you get money, we will have to go in and reevaluate again to make sure that we're on the right side of the law. And unfortunately, it's extremely rushed in a good sense because companies need the money now. But this is going to be litigated by some DA that wants to make a name for themselves at some point in a year or 2 from now. So then, we are going to keep our record keeping as tight as possible and have legal review on top of it. But that is my concern as a business leader. Yes, we're all diving in. We all want the money, and it's an existential crisis. But my concern is that this becomes a political football that will be litigated in 12 months from now.
Yeah, look, I certainly hope that isn't the case. And I think with respect to PPP, we're trying to do anything we can do as state government to help a federal program have an impact here. And there's always things we can do and things we can't do. I was mindful of the fact that the federal government declared the program to be open last Friday, but I know banks didn't get final regulations till midnight Thursday. And I heard also the application changed. And banks had trouble connecting with the SBA. The rollout has not been without its issues for sure. And what we're trying to do is just stay as close to that as we can. That's why I mentioned the daily dialogue with the SBA person here locally. Our division of banks has been very engaged with our banks. I will say here now, 5 business days from rollout, there's a set of things we were worried about that I think I feel better about, recognizing virtually none of this is within our control as a state. But in terms of banks' adoption and willingness to issue loans, I think that's gotten a lot better than it was clearly by day 1 and day 2. You've seen announcements by the Fed today that are going to certainly help that. We did see some examples of banks hitting their individual caps on how much they could issue of these loans. These are guaranteed by the federal government. Still, a bank has to actually issue the loan initially. So we saw a number of the issues you're seeing, but I think from our standpoint, again, this is stuff we don't control, but stuff we can monitor. I think I feel better about it sitting here on April 9th than certainly did on April 3rd.
Okay, great. Tom Erskine, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Mr. Secretary, Tom Erskine. So I'm CEO of One Door, about 80 employees in the Seaport area. I guess my question is around, first of all, we've got 16,000 feet of office space that's being completely underutilized at this time. Obviously, if there's any need for that space, we'd love to see it being used in a productive way to help in any way possible. And I think that leads to a broader question, which is there any kind of a clearinghouse for ideas with regards to how we can help? Given that, as a smaller organization where we don't have the resources that the crafts have, like a 767 available to go get 1 million masks in China.
Yeah.
But we have 80 employees and a whole team sort of sitting here trying to understand what it is that we might be able to do as an organization to help. And if there's any sort of clearinghouse for ideas around that, it would certainly be fantastic to learn more about how we can engage.
That's great, Tom. I really appreciate you bringing that up. I mentioned the command center, and one of their functions is a portal by which they're receiving help in a lot of different forms. I mentioned the manufacturing idea, helping our manufacturing companies repurpose production lines. There's also an effort there where companies can donate or sell PPE. There's a centralized place where companies or individuals can volunteer. So what we ought to do, Tom Hopcroft, is get that portal address around to your colleagues here. And that's been a good kind of centralized way for people to engage and contribute resources that they may want to bring to bear. But thank you for mentioning that.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Tracy Zen, would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Great, thanks, Tom. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Secretary. I'm Tracy. I'm president for Zipcar. We are a car sharing company. I'm not sure if you're familiar. We have a big presence in Boston. We're headquartered in the Seaport and have about 500 employees nationwide, with about 300 in Boston. We're obviously really focused on managing the health and safety of our business and our employees, followed by cash flow, as many of, I'm sure, other CEOs are as well. I'm just trying to get a sense of recovery. I know we're sort of in defense mode in the next few months, and I think that's the main consensus, but I'm trying to get a sense of when you think we will return to normalcy, and what indicators do you think we should be looking at as a business for consumer confidence or anything more broad, so that we can get a sense of how do we get ready for recovery?
Yeah, Tracy, I wish I could answer the first part of the question on when we're going to return to normalcy. You know, the governor's closure of the non-essential businesses physical location is May 4th. So that is a date that's out there, but I couldn't tell you what's going to happen on May 4th. And I'd be surprised. Well, I don't want to forecast. It's a very hard question to answer. If you look at what some folks are saying around when a return could happen, it really is so much about the spread of the virus and the idea. And this is where testing is really important. The more and more, if you see the curve start to flatten out or go down, and you're doing a lot more testing, that should give people the confidence that things can be more open. And those are the things we're trying to operate against right now. And again, I will say, in so many respects, the worst case will be, geez, we decide we're open for business again, and then this thing comes back. And that would just really, really be tough for consumer confidence and business confidence. So I can't give you a good answer on, but I can tell you the things we're trying to do to get to the other side of the curve. And it does get back to this idea of distancing and trying to flatten the curve out. When that time comes, it's going to be an active partnership by a lot of us to figure out just what does it mean to be open for business and on what basis. But I hope we'll be having that discussion sometime soon.
Right. Just to follow up on that, the CDC this morning gave some sort of further guidance around returning to work for essential workers, and our business is considered essential. How coordinated is the administration with sort of guidance from CDC on what the governor decides to sort of put in place?
It's a good question, Tracy. I wouldn't say it's coordinated, but we follow it really closely. I mean, that is the authority on so much of this stuff, and we all take a really close look at that.
Thank you.
All right.
Raghu Nandan, would you like to introduce yourself and your question up at the top here?
My name is Raghu Nandan. I'm president of Soltric Solutions based in Framingham, Mass. As a follow-up to Tracy's question, whenever we come out of this crisis, those companies who hopefully will survive throughout the crisis due to PPP, cash infusion, however it may be, but then those companies will be looking for contracts so that they can get some of their employees involved, especially small companies. This crisis has let including us, a lot of contracts fall by the wayside. Is there anything that the agencies can do, at least from a state side, at least set aside some of the contracts for small business, so that for temporarily, for a period of time, where it can help those businesses come out of this on the other side?
I want to make sure I'm getting the question. So that the contracts wouldn't expire during this period of time? Is that the concern?
No. I was asking, is there any thinking on setting aside some of the contracts from the agency side for small and mid-sized business when we come out of this?
Oh, for state contracts.
For state contracts.
Yeah. It's a good point, and we should take a look at that. We've had for a long time a supplier diversity program and some effort by the part of the state to make sure we're purchasing from a diverse array of suppliers. But perhaps with this particular issue, we should take a broader look at that program. It's a good point.
Yeah, especially for companies who are in the survival mode right now.
Yeah.
To come out, there would be nothing to do for a while.
Yeah. I'll take a close look at that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So we have about 10 more minutes. And so if you have additional questions, please list them in the chat. I have a couple of questions from some folks who ended up not being able to join us on the call that I thought I'd put out. One of them was about when a decision would be made about whether childcare or school will reopen on May 4th. And the challenge is more not knowing than it not being open, but just people trying to make plans in their lives. Do you have any insight into that, Mr. Secretary?
I don't, Tom. I will just say this though, that we're mindful of the fact that we can't you can't reopen on 24 hours notice, right? So I'm sure there'll be some advanced period of time on that one, but I don't have a date for you right now. And again, this is all in the context of what we think is going to be the worst of what we're experiencing the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And another question, I don't see Bobby here, Bobby Carlton, but she was wondering if there is any evidence to say whether women and women-led and minority-owned businesses are being more adversely impacted than businesses run by men. I suspect that's probably the case.
Yeah, we haven't seen that, Tom. I think that what we've seen is more just incredible impacts on some industries versus others. And that's the stuff we're particularly mindful of right now. It is really, really tough for, I'd say, virtually all companies in certain industries. And obviously other companies are having a different experience, but I've not seen any evidence of that yet.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing additional questions, so I'll say a few things while I give people a moment or two if they want to ask another question, and if not, we'll give you some time back in your day. What we've seen is, Mr. Secretary, you're absolutely right. Within tech as well as within other sectors, it's very lumpy as to where the impacts are being felt. All of us, of course, have our employees all working remotely, and tech is actually in a reasonably good position to do that, since many of us already have the tools and are very familiar with doing that. But it's really the different customer segments, and some of them are being the ones where we have customers that are that their businesses are being impacted by the mitigation efforts that are getting absolutely hit the hardest. And so you can imagine the travel, some certain retail and that aren't online, as well as restaurants and other areas. And then on the flip side, we have a number of companies that are providing solutions, companies like LogMeIn that are providing this platform here, or other solutions that make working in this kind of environment easier are doing a little bit better. So we're seeing a whole range of impacts across there. I'm just looking here. Bruce says, "Is there a wish list where we can draw from networks?" Okay, so what we're going to continue to do as we have been, which is pulling together a group of CEOs every couple of weeks. We're pulling them together. We're having conversations and producing a readout from that for our broader executive community. We can keep you in the loop on that, and we're going to continue to participate in our regular calls tomorrow and others that get scheduled throughout the week, and continue to flow the information from the Baker administration to the tech community as well. Maybe in a little bit of time, we'll have another one of these with you or with one of the other secretaries to have a direct one-on-one Ask the Expert kind of conversation. But we really, really appreciate your time. I know it's a very, very busy time for you and everyone in the administration, as well as all of the executives that are here. Thank you as well. We're in this together, and we're going to get through it together. And I'm a firm believer that technology and innovation will lead the recovery and the way out of all of this. So I wish everyone the best for the rest of their day, and thank you all for tuning in.
Tom, if I could just say just a few words to wrap up, I want to thank you for giving me this forum today, and just thank you for your partnership and your collaboration. You've been a great advocate for the industry, and it's been an important dialogue for us. And it is not lost in any of us in the Baker administration, the importance of the technology economy for Massachusetts. So we've been a world-leading innovation economy for a long, long time. I was checking my calendar. I think it was the end of January I came to speak to your group. And talk about our initiatives around the innovation economy, some of which got reflected in the economic development bill I mentioned. But we have for a long time been really focused on what we can do to help preserve, if not extend, that leadership position and identify new sectors of the technology economy where we can lead. It's just been core to our thinking for a really long time. And I look forward to another opportunity to talk about that in a much more forward-looking way once we get past the crisis we're in now.
Yeah, on a positive note, I'll say that we've always talked about the impact that tech has as a sector. It's a large sector and it's a growth sector. and it's powering all of these other amazing sectors that we have around here, the computational biology and other areas. But this event that we're all living through right now is one of the, I can't think of any greater catalyst for digital transformation of our economy. The number of, I've done medical appointments, I've done teacher meetings, just every kind of, I'm doing more kinds of e-commerce and things. And so this is the sort of digital transformation that our economy would eventually have had, and this shock to the system is it's really putting us there a lot faster. And so there'll be a lot of issues that we have to work out to make sure that that access is spread evenly and equitably. But if there's a silver lining, I guess that might be it. But thank you again for your time. Thank you to everyone who's able to tune in, and to everyone who can watch this later on. Take care.
Thank you.
Good. Bye.
Thanks.